Welcome to episode 37 of the Landlady Boss podcast. I'm here with my sister and co-host Rachel. Hello, Rachel.
Hi, Marie. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. We just got a third snowstorm for the season, so it's snowing outside like
Oh my
crazy.
goodness.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
won't show you what it looks like outside for me because it is palm trees and sunshine, but
Yeah, don't.
that's okay. No, I won't. But today I'm so excited. We have a special guest with us today, Lindsay Betschart, and she is here from Elevated Bookkeeping and Accounting. And I'm so excited to hear from her expertise and her background. She has nearly 20 years in property management, bookkeeping, and accounting, specializing in vacation rental accounting, and she has a degree in business administration and real estate. So, hello, Lindsay. I'm so happy to have you here.
Good to be here too.
Thank you
Welcome.
so much. Now, I wanted to dive in a little bit. It said that you had done long-term rental properties, but then now you're currently in vacation. Can you kind of give us a little rundown of what you do?
Yeah, so I kind of fell into property management accounting in the beginning of my accounting career, and I just kind of continued to do that. And most of it was long term. I just dealt with a lot of long term, worked at a property management office. I actually did a lot more than accounting. I did all the maintenance requests, and I
Oh, wow.
actually went and cleaned properties sometimes when we didn't have someone. I mean, I had my hands in all of it, like from start to finish.
Wow.
And so I got a lot of knowledge and experience, and that was actually while I was going to school for real estate and business that I was working that job, and I loved it. And then I kind of continued down that path, and then I would say about 3 years ago, I started getting into the short term because it seems like it's a big industry up. Like it's just massive, and the need for people that know how to handle that kind of bookkeeping is just there's just a huge need for it. So I started like really getting my hands in that and learning it. And I went to Verma, a couple conferences and stuff, and just really started learning what I needed to know. And I've been doing that for about 3 years now. So yeah.
That's fantastic. That's definitely a new niche, and I feel like it's one that maybe people aren't really familiar with, but now all of a sudden there's just so many landladies that are getting into the short-term rental game, and that can kind of change your accounting and bookkeeping for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. So, what licensing training software would you suggest for somebody getting started? What's really helpful for you to know? Which programs?
So definitely I would say having an accounting software of some sort is super important. Bookkeeping is like, I think it's a key component of any business really, but especially I think in property management, it's so important because you have funds that are not yours that you're holding for a certain period of time. So QuickBooks is, I love QuickBooks. I use it for most of my clients. However, in the vacation rental industry specifically, there's a software that came out a couple years ago called Clearing, and they focus specifically on this industry. Like that is what they built the software for, is property management accounting. And
Mhm.
so I have a lot of clients that use that software as well. It communicates directly with property management software, so it pulls in the reservation data, and then it also communicates directly with QuickBooks. So I find that their software is super helpful because it's grabbing things from all the different places, since you might have things happening in all these different
Mhm.
systems. And so I do really like that because it's almost like a central hub where all the information is stored. And then it kind of can be put out wherever it needs to go to QuickBooks or whatever. So I would say the vast majority of people, I encourage them to use at least one of those two, if not both of those systems.
Mhm.
And then obviously outside of that, you definitely want a property management software for sure. And so I would say those are like the most important key things to have.
Do those softwares actually collect rent too, or you mean have a separate property management software for rent collection and maintenance?
Yeah, I would have a separate property management software that does that piece, and then the data can be communicated with your accounting software. Or for long term, I definitely like some of the softwares that have the accounting built into it. There are a couple short term that also have that, but it is harder to find like something that has everything. Like it's not quite like
Mhm.
available to the full extent anyway. So most
Right.
people, I feel like, still need a QuickBooks file or something else to support that full accounting. Because, like, a lot of them don't have a balance sheet, which is a great example of something that you really should have in your business, and stuff like that. So I just feel like nothing really fully encompasses everything that's needed. And so you kind of end up having to have more than one thing that you need, unfortunately. I wish there was one that like did everything, but
I wish
Right.
too. Oh, that'd be amazing.
yeah.
We need to build one. We need something that does it all.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when you're talking about taking the data from your bank account and then you upload it into QuickBooks and then clearing, that's the next place where you go and categorize it, or do you do everything out of Quick and
Actually, clearing has a similar feature like QuickBooks in the sense that it actually directly links to your bank accounts as well and brings in all your transactional data that's happening in the bank account and credit cards. Whatever accounts you link basically will still bring in
Oh,
the
wow.
transactional data as well. And so you can actually choose to categorize it in clearing and then share that categorization with QuickBooks. So you could do it that way, or you can do coding in both. It's really kind of a preference. Say it takes about the same amount of time either way. So it's kind of if you'd rather just do it in both systems or push it over. But that feature is available too in their system. And they do also offer owner statements in their system. So if you're going to do owner statements out of their system, then I usually tag in their system, because then everything that's like expense related that's going to the owner for reimbursement and stuff like that can all be tagged and go directly to the owner statement itself. So
Great. So how do you stay organized with bookkeeping while managing other multiple rental properties?
so I would say the biggest like recommendation advice I can give, it's a lot. Managing units is a lot of work. It takes a lot of time. There's a lot of guest communication. There's a lot of tenant communication. If it's long term, just there's a lot happening. And I feel like bookkeeping constantly falls by the wayside because people just don't have time to address their bookkeeping. And it's unfortunate because it's extremely important to have your bookkeeping under control. So if you don't have the time, I strongly encourage that you find someone that can help you, because I cannot tell you how many clients come to me and their books are a disaster. It's extremely common. I do cleanups regularly on people's books, catch-ups of a year's worth of stuff because they have not kept up on it and they have no idea how their business is doing. So they're just winging it, out there winging it. And it's just, I just think that that's kind of crazy. I honestly think that having your books under control and knowing what's happening every month is so important. It helps you decide if you can afford to buy another property. It helps you decide if you have a property you're managing that's not doing well for you at all, and maybe you don't want to keep it. Maybe you want to let that property go. Like, there's just so many decisions that are made based on what your books look like. So to just let them go or not have time to focus on them, it's not really ideal. So to me, it's worth the money to pay someone if you have to, because you don't have the time to have a bookkeeper or someone that can keep your stuff current and up to date, because you can make much smarter decisions having the data available to you that's accurate and current, right? So,
Right. When you're choosing to set up your software, like you're getting a business and you're uploading it, and do you categorize all the way down to which appliance is being repaired, or do you just do repairs? Like I've heard both sides, and one group says, okay, maintenance, cleaning, repairs, just like huge categories that they can push everything in, and other people are like repairs, appliance, dishwasher, like all the way down to which appliance was purchased or repaired or etc. So how nitty gritty do you get down in your categorizations of your invoices?
so I would say like it's honestly a personal preference, because if you want to see every single item individually, like it can be done. I would say most commonly, though, I see more general accounts like, maintenance and repair costs, right? And then under that, you might have maintenance and repair contractors, because you do want to break out labor from like parts and supplies, because you have 1099s, you need to send vendors that are doing labor work, right? So for your housekeeping and your maintenance, you for sure should at least have a breakdown of what's labor versus what supplies, so that you're not sending a 1099 to somebody that you just reimburse them for supplies. So I would say at a minimum, it's nice to have those sub accounts of like those types of items. But some people like to get really, really detailed. They want to know how much they're spending on linen specifically, how much on, toiletry type items, like, and they can get way more specific. But I would say it's honestly like your choice, like what you want basically to see on your P&L, because it can get very big. Like if you do a lot of sub accounts, your P&L can get very massive, and it can be harder to follow sometimes, like on what exactly is going on. My standard that I usually encourage people to use is a little bit more upper level and not necessarily as detailed, but we always give the option. We can add whatever sub accounts you want to add, like whatever you want to see, you know.
Do you find that your clients will then come to you and do kind of an analysis like per property? Do you kind of do like an annual sit down and say, okay, this is not working, or this is what's working, or it was profitable or not?
Yeah, I would say that that's one of the bigger things that happens when clients come to me and they have not necessarily kept up on things. I would say the number one thing I hear from them is, I want to know how this property is doing. I want to know how that property is doing. Like, I want to see how everything is working so I can decide if I want to keep it or get rid of it or whatever. And so what I usually encourage people to do if they are in QuickBooks is to have classes in QuickBooks so that you can actually create a class for every property that you own or manage, whatever your situation is, so that everything can be categorized to that specific property. So you can actually run a P&L that shows you just how that property alone is doing. And you can see that on a monthly, quarterly, or annual basis to make decisions and decide, you know, what you want to do. Some people choose not to use classes and just have basically what their management company makes only on their P&L, and then the other things that relate to like the owners for liability purposes and stuff, like what they owe their owners, and that is usually held on the balance sheet. The only drawback to that is you don't necessarily see how each individual property is doing. So it's a little harder to get that like detailed view. But some people feel like they can get that from their PMS or somewhere else, and they don't necessarily feel they need it in their book. So again, that's also a personal preference. I personally prefer to see classes, though. I think that it's a much better picture of what your company looks like and how each property is doing.
That's so helpful because, yeah, if you don't have the numbers, if you don't see what's actually happening, you don't know, should I get rid of this property? Do I have money to get a different property, or is this a good area to expand? So the numbers are so important. I can't stress that. And I know Rachel and I, we use different systems. We don't use the same kind. I know Rachel uses Buildium, and she manages a lot of properties for other landlords, so really likes kind of that interface where she can be, you know, showing them their own portals and accounts. And then I have a variety of things too, but I use Stessa, which is a free app, but I think there's a pro version, and you know, you can just have that app and take pictures of the receipts and click the category and click the property. So I have found that to be very user-friendly and easy, but it's so great to hear, you know, different options because bookkeeping is so pivotal to property management.
Yeah, I actually have several clients that have used Stessa as well or still use it. Some of them have gone from Stessa over to QuickBooks or still use it. So that system's actually pretty good as well. I would say I don't use it as much as I use QuickBooks, but it's still, from what I've used, I think that system also is pretty good.
Have you noticed a difference with QuickBooks? I know that there's like the online version and then the desktop version, and I've heard different things about either one, and maybe the online's not great, or, you know, what do you recommend with QuickBooks?
So there are pros and cons to both. I feel like QuickBooks Online has gotten so much better than it was originally. And I do feel like QuickBooks is trying to focus their energy there. They're trying to get away from desktop. They want online to be their main thing. And so they're putting a lot more effort and work into getting it to a much better place. So it's pretty user friendly, and I find it works great. Most of my clients are on QuickBooks Online. With that being said, though, I started with desktop a million years ago. So I also enjoy QuickBooks Desktop. And I do think that they have a lot of features in there and it works great. The only drawback, like I said, is Intuit is kind of getting away from desktop. So there's a lot less support. You can't buy new versions anymore. Like I think 2024 was the last version you could buy, and they're not going to sell it anymore. So it's a short-term software, in my opinion, at this point to use desktop. And they're making it way more expensive to buy a desktop than it ever used to be as well. Because again, they don't want people really using it anymore. So it's, to me, just not really like a long-term solution anymore. However, if people are on desktop, they can ride it out as long as they can. And then they do have conversion option where you can convert your desktop file into their online whenever you can't use your desktop anymore. So some people are just riding it out and waiting and doing that. And I would say that works, especially because if you already have desktop, it's cheaper than paying a subscription every month, which is a drawback to QuickBooks. You do have to pay a subscription for the online version. But I do like that it integrates with a lot of stuff, and there's payroll within it, which is great. If you have payroll, it's built in. And so there are definitely a lot of great features with that online version, I think, too.
Well, that's really good. I made the mistake of putting all my bank accounts into a credit union. And so when I was using Quicken for property managers for a decade, it never actually would like coordinate with my bank account. I would always have to download and then upload. And that's the same thing with Buildium. I mean, so the credit union's lovely, free checking, tons of savings accounts. You can get a whole bunch, but in the end, it's not actually communicating very well with the different softwares. So that was an oops.
An oops.
I do feel like QuickBooks has expanded what they, like how many things can sync now. Like I find it extremely rare that I find a bank account that can't be linked to QuickBooks nowadays. Like they just have like vastly expanded what they allow to sync in. I don't know if your credit union would at this point, but I just know that in general, they've done a lot to like bring on a lot of new banks and things that weren't originally available. So I do think they're improving on that. Like I said, it's really where they're focusing their energy. Like this is the product that they want to put all their time and effort into. So.
Well, I think most busy landladies need a software on the go. You know, when you're running around in your cart, you need something that you can pull up on your phone. You can take pictures. You need. I mean, I think that is where everyone's at. So it makes a lot of sense they're focusing on that.
Yeah, definitely. They do have that same receipt capture that you were talking about from Stessa. QuickBooks has that as well.
Yeah,
and they do have a mobile app. And so, yeah, they're definitely trying to make it so it is easier on the go because it's true. And receipts, like if you can't do it on the go, chances are you're not going to see at least half of them, right? Like again, they're
I
just
always forget.
You know what I mean? Like, so I chase down receipts regularly. It's hard to do after the fact, right? When it's happening, it's a lot easier to be in the habit and be like, I need to take a picture of this. I need to put it in, you know?
True.
So yeah.
Very true.
Lindsay, what would you say is the biggest bookkeeping mistake that you find property investors or managers making?
I would say for property management, the biggest mistake that I see and the one that I usually am like a big no-no on is commingling their funds. Meaning that they don't have a separation of what's their money versus what's not. So instead of having to, I strongly encourage 2 different bank accounts, one for your operating, your overhead, like things that you pay for and responsible for, your payroll, your bank fees, like that kind of stuff is all in one account, an operating account. And it has nothing to do with income that you're bringing in for rents, so that the 2 are not connected in any way. And then you have a different bank account where all your income comes in. This is what you pay your owners out of. This is what you pay your management company out of for your commissions, and stuff like that. So it comes out as a transfer to your operating rather than you having everything together. That to me, I would say is the biggest mistake that I see people make. And if they come on as a client for me, I usually encourage right away to get 2 bank accounts if they don't have that. Or if they do have 2, but they're not doing the separation, then I encourage them to use the 2 to separate. I would say that's probably my biggest no-no, is because it can ruin your business. If let's say COVID happened again, everything shuts down and you have to refund all these people. I'm talking short term right now. You have to refund all these people that had reservations because no one's allowed to go anywhere or do anything. If you've spent money that wasn't yours because you had it mixed in with your other stuff, how are you going to refund those guests? You are going to have to come up with that money. Let's say you have owners that you owe from the previous month and you're paying out guests that are canceling, and then you can't pay your owners. You're going to lose your owners. You're going to have, like, it's just, it can be a huge mess. So that's why it's super important to have that money set aside in a different account that you're not touching for your standard expenses, so that you have money if someone cancels or whatever, the case is. So that's usually my biggest advice that I give in this particular industry.
That's really good advice. I know I'm of the mindset where, I have every property has a different bank account, and people either love that or hate it, but I just really like being able to have everything separate, because I do have an property operating account and different things that expenses and renos and things come out of. But for each property, I just love keeping them separate, and so that I can have, this property, the money is there. It's not all commingled, and then I'm trying to pull things from different things. So for me, that makes it very easy. And then I always have that separate account for deposits, to keep those deposits in their own account so it's not with everything else. So those are some things that I have found to be very helpful.
Yeah, I have quite a few clients that also have bank accounts for every property, which it's more to reconcile from a bookkeeping perspective, but it's also very clean. Like it's very clean and it does help with categorizing too, because, okay, well, if it happened in this bank account, I know it's for this property. So I don't need to go ask you, hey, what property was this Amazon purchase for? Like I already know because it was in that bank account. So it definitely helps in that regard. It's just a little bit more time consuming from a bank reconciliation perspective, but I would say it's still super helpful. So I don't have any issues with people doing it that way. But again, it's a personal preference. Some people want that many bank accounts, some people don't, so.
I've gotten all sorts of free umbrellas and backpacks, or what the banks give away. Every time I go in and get another bank account, I get my free whatever.
Yeah.
A couple crock pots, I think.
How often do you reconcile your bank accounts?
So I actually do, normally standard, I do monthly reconciliations. That's the minimum. So, when the bank statement comes out and it's ready to go, then we reconcile for the month. However, I do have some instances where we do it more often. An example of that would be let's say a property management company is kind of new and they don't have a lot of cash flow. Then we may do weekly or bi-weekly reconciliations to figure out how much money in that income account is technically theirs, because the time the reservation has occurred or whatever the case is, they can actually transfer that money legally now over to their operating. So I do have instances like that where we're reconciling what's occurred so that money can be moved. And then some clients just want their stuff done weekly. So we'll bring all the bank feeds in, categorize everything, but not necessarily process a reconciliation per se until that month end. So it just kind of depends on the client and how much activity is happening and how much cash flow they have and stuff like that. But we kind of customize it depending on what they need.
Yeah, I think most people need a bookkeeper because of, if they're handling all of the maintenance, the check-ins, the checkouts, the property maintenance of everything that's coming in and out, and then doing their books. I mean, it is a lot, but I think most people imagine that that's not something that they can afford. What do you think bed count, unit count, door count would be the trigger point of being able to afford a bookkeeper?
That's hard because you could have a lower bed count, but you have high-end units. So it kind of does depend a little bit. But I would say even if you just have a bookkeeper that you're paying for 2 hours a month or an hour or two a month, just to even help oversee what you have going on, or just do your bank reconciliations or something, I would say it doesn't matter what size you are, it's worth it. Because if you're keeping up on your stuff, that's really what matters. I have some smaller clients that are, they only have a couple doors and they still want a bookkeeper, but they help with with categorizing, because they don't want to pay for us to categorize, and they kind of know everything that's happening every day. So they just have us do their reconciliations because they're not comfortable with the bank reconciliation. And then they have us, audit their work, basically audit everything on the P&L, audit their balance sheet, and then send them reports. And then they know someone's looking at it at least, and staying on top of them too, right? If we go to close their books and stuff's not done, then it's kind of like an extra motivator too. Hey, there's some stuff that's not categorized. Can you tell me what this stuff is for, or whatever? So it's kind of, a win-win there too, because sometimes people just are like, you know what, I'll deal with the bookkeeping later, and they just push it off to the side. Right. But by having someone there to help you, push you, is kind of makes it come back to the front of your mind, oh, I need to do this. So I would say it doesn't matter how big or small you are, having at least some sort of support from a bookkeeper is extremely important, unless you know exactly what you're doing and you have the time to do it. So
Sounds like it would make tax season so much easier if
yeah.
throughout the year you just had it already all categorized and done. Right now I'm just double checking things, but that takes a lot of time. I try to go through, but I feel like I'm the only one that can do that because I know what each, property expense was. But I spend so much time just double checking and I don't even know if I really need to, but I don't know, a little obsessive about it, I guess.
No, that's fair. I mean, you really are the one that knows what's going on every single day. And we strongly encourage all of our clients to review everything that we give them monthly and, however often we give them reports and review it in detail and make sure. And if we do, we do assist people with owner statements as well. And if we do, we require that they approve them before we process them out. Because of that reason, like we're your bookkeeper, great, but we're not in the day to day. We're not communicating with your tenants. We're not communicating with your owners. We're not, you know what I mean? We're not doing all of that. So you're going to know
Right.
everything that's happening, and we're only going to know what we've been told. So it's like a requirement if we're going to help with owner statements that you review them and approve them before we send them out. Because of that reason, it's just not realistic to assume that we're going to know everything that's going on that
Right. Is there anything, you may not know the answer to this, but is there anything that you handle differently if someone's, say, renovating a rental property and so the expenses are for like a reno versus just like a repair?
Yes. So if it's for like a fix and flip, let's say, or like a leasehold improvement, then that usually is run on your balance sheet versus on your P&L. So every expense, it doesn't matter how small, is going to run through like a leasehold improvements account on your balance sheet. Whereas if you're just repairing something, it's going to run through your P&L unless it's maybe over the threshold. So, usually standard is like $2,500. If it's under that, most of the time it hits your P&L. And if it's over that, usually it's an asset of some sort. But when you're doing like a fix and flip, for example, everything that you do, $10 on Amazon, it goes on the balance sheet and it's all put into that, amount that you're spending for that renovation. That way, if you ever go to sell later or whatever, that is included in kind of your asset value, right? Because you put this, expense in to improve it in some way. So.
Oh, that's a really good thing to point out. I hadn't thought of that you'd want that amount in that total because, yeah, when you do go to sell a property, they want to know what is your total investment in it. And I hadn't thought if you categorize it wrong, it may not show up accurately. So that's really good to know.
It is really good. All your different clients, do you have clients on Buildium, and do you have clients on RentMaster, like all of the different rental software? And are you good with bringing in the information and categorizing and doing the bookkeeping for people on different software?
So that is one thing that we have our hands in a lot of different property management softwares because there are so many out there. And I do feel like they are similar enough in the sense that it usually doesn't take us long to figure out a new one if there is a new one that's brought to us. And so we usually will just take a little bit of time, figure out where their reporting is, where their, different things are. For the most part, from a bookkeeping perspective, we mostly need to know where we can find, reservation or rent information, where we can get reports, pull financial reports for different things. Those are the main areas that we're going to use in a property management software, And so as long as we can figure those out, which most of the time is not an issue, we use a lot of them. We have been in Buildium. A lot of the short-term ones we have experience in. I have a lot of years of experience with AppFolio because that's what I used when I worked at the property management company that I used to work at. So I have a lot of experience with that one. So yeah, we're just kind of all over really. But they're all similar enough. I feel like it's pretty easy to pick up a new one.
Right. Makes
sense. Do you have a favorite one that you like to use?
It's been years since I used AppFolio, but I did like it when I used it for that company that I worked for. I would say for short-term rental, my favorite is probably OwnerRez, and that is because they have the best, I think, financial information. I find that their system just has a lot of really good reporting, and it's not hard for me to find what I need from them. So I would say I like that one a lot. I have used Buildium more recently, and I did like their software quite a bit when I used it recently as well. And then I would say Guesty is another short-term one that I also think has a pretty good accounting system where I can get a lot of information easily. So I would say those are probably my top 4, 2 for long-term and 2 for short-term.
Nice. It's really good. When you're tracking miles, a lot of the property management requires you to go property to property. And I think tracking miles, whether you're clocked in or whether you just track the miles and then get reimbursed, what do you find is the best way to do that?
So I would say for reimbursement, like I find that it's better to do like time most likely or a flat amount. Like, hey, I went to your property, so I'm charging a flat dollar amount. Like this is, and that includes whatever the case may be, travel time, but it's like a travel charge or
Right.
something like that. So that works really well, I think. And then if your owners kind of know that and they can expect that, like, hey, they went to the property and they charged this or whatever. I think it's easier than tracking miles because especially if you're doing like, let's say you're out and you're going to hit up 5 different properties in a day, it just gets kind of messy. You're like, okay, it was this many miles to this one, and then it was this many miles to that one. But then you're kind of tracking mileage maybe from one house to another rather than from wherever your office is or whatever to a property. And so your mileage can get kind of messy in that regard where it's just not as easy to track, I think, versus like, this is how much I charge if I have to go to your unit. It's a flat amount or whatever. Or tracking your time is another good way to do that too. So I lean more towards that than the mileage option. Yeah.
Just doing like a flat fee makes it a little easier. I could see that because otherwise you're trying to do the calculations. And I know like for me, my car is in my LLC, so we just keep track of like the receipts and expenses for like gas and repairs and things like that. But I do have a different vehicle that is not, and so my accountant said, track the miles. And it is a little cumbersome when it's like, okay, I have to split it over 3 properties and do that. It's a lot of math.
Yeah. And I think like whatever you decide, each vehicle, especially this is kind of outside of what we were just talking about, sort of, but also relates. But if you're going to have a vehicle in your business, you do have to decide like if you're going to do real expense or mileage, and you have to make that decision and then you have to stick with it usually. So whatever you're doing when you first start using that vehicle, whether it's mileage or tracking your actual expenses, you have to be consistent with that continuously year over year. And then if you get another vehicle, you can make a different choice. So kind of like what you brought up, like mileage versus, expenses. But it's important to like think about what's a better benefit for you so that you can make that right choice depending on what's going to work best for you. Like if you think you're spending way more expense than a mileage, the standard mileage deduction or whatever is, then I would go that route, So it is important to think about that from your business side as well.
Right, and that might be a good tax strategy to talk with your CPA about if you are trying to figure out which is better, kind of coming up with those strategies. So
Definitely.
It does bring me to, do you have, you probably see businesses that are in, say, an S Corp versus an LLC. I know we're kind of getting into the weeds and you're not a CPA, not doing, tax strategizing, but, is there a benefit you see, or what would you recommend as a bookkeeper?
So in my experience, what I've learned is that it's best to have an LLC if your net profit is less than 40,000 a year. Like what you're making is less than that, then usually an LLC is sufficient, and you just take draws from the company, no payroll, all of that. Once you are over 40,000 net profit per year, then it starts, being maybe beneficial for you to get an S Corp election. And again, it's best to talk to your CPA about it because they know your entire tax situation. So they know what your personal taxes look like. They know, if you have any other businesses outside of this, they kind of can see everything as a whole. So they would be able to recommend like, yes, it's a good idea that you do the S Corp election. But once you do an S Corp election, you are required to pay yourself payroll. So instead of doing draws, which you still can do draws, but you have to at least pay yourself 50% of what your net income is on an annual salary. So,
wow.
And you can pay that monthly or, annually, however you want to pay yourself. But it's an IRS guideline that you need to pay yourself if you're an S Corp through your payroll. There are tax benefits for that though. So it does kind of work out to help you out once you're hitting that higher net profit to potentially do that election, and then you would put yourself on payroll. And if you want to take more out than the 50%, then you can take that as a draw. You're just required to at least have paid yourself 50% of your net profit as a salary. So those are just different things to think about if you're trying to make that decision, and definitely incorporate your CPA in the decision. I would recommend, just because, like I said, they have your whole tax situation available to them to make that best decision for you.
Obviously, I'm sure you recommend getting a CPA and getting a bookkeeper. Would you recommend that they communicate together, or is it fine if they're totally separate entities?
They can definitely be separate. We usually do communicate with most of our clients' CPAs at least at year end, saying, "Hey, here's all the books for the year. Like, we've completed everything. Everything's in the system." Um, and then we usually will tell them these unique things happened, or here's the loan statements, because we reconcile everything, like at the end, like we do everything, so we're literally handing them books that are ready to be filed. The taxes are ready, so we'll give them year-end statements that they need. We'll let them know any unique situations that have happened, stuff like that, and kind of just send that over to them, and then they communicate with the client about whatever else they may need, like miles, or 1099s that they received, or W-2s, or whatever for their personal stuff. So the CPA kind of takes over from there. We've given them what they need. And then if the CPA has any questions, like, hey, how come you coded this here, or whatever, then we are always available to them if they need us. So I would say it's great to have a relationship with them, if even just to talk to them at the year end time, so that you make sure they know everything that you did, and that they know that you're available to communicate with. But not every CPA like cares about that, or or needs that necessarily. So there are some that like we don't really ever talk to. We just kind of send them the stuff, and that's that. And then we have a handful of them that we actually recommend if people are looking for a CPA. Like, we have a few that we very, very much like, and we'll recommend them to people, whenever someone's asking, because it is common that people are like, hey, I'm looking for a CPA or whatever. So we also have a recommendation list for us personally at Elevated as well. So.
Oh, that's fantastic. Now, you're based in Arizona, correct?
So I'm in Arizona, but I actually have a business partner. She's in Utah. And then our team is
Okay.
kind of all over. We're all remote. There's 11 of us, and we're kind of all spread out. We've got Colorado, Texas, kind of everywhere, really. And then we have clients that are all over the US as well. So we kind of are 100% remote, which is very nice.
Perfect. So yeah, they don't even have to be near you, or you have people that have
Yeah.
rentals all over the country. That's really nice.
Yeah, how would you shop for a bookkeeper? Like, what would you suggest for our listeners to look for when they're trying to find one?
Definitely referral if possible, because then you kind of know, like, from someone you trust maybe, or something like that, that who you're getting is good and knows what they're doing. I would say, like, also, especially for this industry, like, a lot of times there may be bookkeepers or accountants that are actually partnered with these different software companies. And so actually talking to your software company, they may have a list of people that they consider their accounting partners. And most likely you can trust that if they're referring, then they're likely legitimately good bookkeepers. And so I would definitely start there, like reaching out to any of your friends that you know, or people that you've met in this industry, and asking them who they're using, reaching out to your software companies to see if they have a list of accounting partners. I would say starting there is much better than just like trying to find someone on Google or something like that. I just feel like referral is a really good way to make sure that you are most likely getting a good recommendation from someone. So
In bookkeeping, how do you normally structure the pay scale? Is it on retainer? People pay a flat fee, or you had mentioned like hourly? How do you do that at least?
So normally what I do for my personal pricing structure is, if they're coming on and they have cleanup or catch up work that needs to be done, then we always bill that hourly, because we do try to find a range estimate, but I can't tell you how many times we find issues deep down when we dig in that are unexpected. So rather than like saying it's going to be this flat amount, we usually do hourly for that. However, we do try to give the best estimate that we can with a range of, like, we think it'll be between these hours and these hours. And then if it's ever going to go over, we always get approval. Like, hey, we ran into this hiccup and we need to like spend a couple more hours or whatever, and let them know so that they're not getting blindsided by a bill that they weren't expecting. So that's kind of how we handle our standard like cleanup catch up work. Once that's done and they're ready to start with like monthly services with us, we usually figure out what monthly services you're looking for, how extensive it is, and then we come up with a flat fee for them. And then they know what they're paying every month, right? On the first of the month, we bill in advance. They get a bill for whatever their flat amount is, and then we do all their books for the prior month. And that is only adjusted or changed. Let's say they get like 10 new units, or they add 5 bank accounts or 10 bank accounts, or if there's things that drastically change the time that we're spending on their stuff, then they may have a price increase that happens because of that. But we usually try to lock in our rate up to a certain number of properties being added or certain things being added so that they kind of can rely on it for a little while, because it's very common in this industry that they're trying to grow, they're trying to get more doors, and so they don't want to have their price changed every month because they got one new door or whatever. So we try to lock it in for a certain period of time so that they kind of know, okay, I can grow this much before my bookkeeping price is going to go up. So, and then in a big cleanup or catch up project, we also do usually charge a retainer for that if it's like a larger project, just to get us going. So we kind of do all of the different things that you just mentioned, depending on the situation and what's needed for them.
What are some red flags that your bookkeeper needs to be replaced? What's something that you would be seeing that should have you concerned and you notice that?
I would say probably one of the biggest things that I hear from people that is kind of alarming to me is like they never get reports, or they don't hear from their bookkeeper. Those, honestly, those to me are huge red flags. Like, why is your bookkeeper not communicating with you, and why are you not seeing reports from them? Those I would say are huge. And then just, I think honestly, if a bookkeeper has like some sort of auditing process, is extremely important. It's built into our base. Like, it doesn't matter what bookkeeping plan you get with us, like we will audit what we do. And we have a 2-person audit requirement in my company, meaning that the bookkeeper audits their own work and then they send it to someone else to audit their work too, to make sure that there are not mistakes, that things didn't get missed, to make sure everything's been reconciled, to make sure that the P&L makes sense. Like, hey, last month you put this in, dues, and this month you put it in technology. Like, why is it in 2 different accounts? So I think having that kind of system is extremely important when you're looking or shopping for a bookkeeper too. Like, hey, do you have any kind of audit process that you do to make sure that you're catching any mistakes that you've made? Like, I think that's a great question to ask when you're interviewing a bookkeeper. And then I would say the biggest red flags is when you don't have any kind of communication with them and you're not seeing your reports. Like, if you have a bookkeeper, you should be getting monthly financials every month. And they should be consistent too. Like in my company, we have due dates. Like, you pick your due date when you sign with us. Usually it's between the 10th and 15th or so. What do you want your due date to be? And we're supposed to have our financial reports to you by that day. The only time that doesn't happen is if we're waiting on you, meaning like we've sent you question items and you haven't responded to us. Then in that case, like, we may be late, right? But it's not going to be because of us. Like, that's our policy. So I think that kind of consistency is also super important. And then we also have a 24-hour response policy in my company too, that if someone reaches out to you, obviously I don't expect my people to work on the weekend, so I'm talking business days, but if someone reaches out, you're expected to respond within 24 hours so that they know that, hey, you're here, you're working on it. Even if your response is just, I'm working on it, I'll get back to you. Like, they need to know that you're communicating with them and you're not just leaving them out there, so.
That's good. Excellent.
So much good stuff. I know we're running out of time here. One last question, something kind of fun. Can you think of maybe the most disaster client that you've ever had? Obviously, don't give personal information, but can you think of the craziest situation that you've had to clean up?
Yes, I did have a client that had a ton of personal mixed in with business. So they had a QuickBooks file, tons of personal accounts connected, personal credit cards, plus business accounts, business credit cards, and everything was intermingled and tangled together. And on top of that, they wanted to maintain control over everything, but also wanted like us to fix it. And so it was a struggle because everything was very messy, but then they didn't want to listen to any advice or recommendations that we gave either. So it was very tough because they were so used to doing it the way that they had done it, and they didn't understand that it was not done correctly and needed to be
Right.
fixed. So it was a little bit of a battle, and then just very messy because you should not be mixing personal and business together if you can avoid it in any part. Like it should not happen. So there was a lot of untangling and messiness there, in addition to just
Wow.
difficulty trying to get them to adjust their ways, because they, you get stuck in your way and you just think, oh, well, this is what I've been doing, but that doesn't mean that it's the right way. So, it was definitely a little bit rough for sure.
Oh my goodness, that sounds so hard. Difficult personality and a mess of finances, so double whammy for sure. Well, this has been so wonderful. Tons of good information, all these nitty-gritty details that, you don't know unless you know them. If people would like to get a hold of you, how is the best way they could do that?
So I have a website, elevatedbooks.com, that actually within there you can actually do a contact reach out via the website. That'll come to my email. There's also my phone numbers on there, or the company phone numbers on there as well. So that's just a good way to just get in, reach out and send us a message. And then usually from there you can actually schedule via my Calendly as well for like a 30-minute free consultation where we talk about your situation, what you need, what you're looking for a bookkeeper, and then you can decide from there, if you want to start moving forward or not. So I would say the website's the best place because you get kind of all the different modes of communication available to you: phone number, email, and just scheduling a meeting.
Perfect. I can put that link in the show notes. And if you are looking for a bookkeeper, feel free to give Lindsay a shout out. That sounds so amazing, especially as we're getting into tax time. It sounds amazing just to have it all done, and it just goes to the CPA and no stress. Sounds incredible.
Yes.
That's the dream, at least. So thank you so much for taking time to come talk with us and share your vast knowledge.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And if you would like to send us questions or comments, we would love to hear from you at landladybosses@gmail.com. And on our website, landladyboss.com, we have courses, we have free information, we have property calculators and templates. So check us out there. And remember, no one can manage your properties as well as you.